Life was peaceful for our dumb ape, Jin Young, until his younger stepsister Bomb decided to ask a sussy question that nearly made him choke on his drink. She wanted to know if he had ever actually done cardio exercise with anyone, which sent him into a coughing fit as he struggled to maintain his composure. Jin Young wondered why she would suddenly bring up such a sensitive topic, but Bomb quickly explained that she had accidentally seen a chat app open on his computer. To his absolute horror, she had discovered his secret identity as a legendary online advisor who helped his friends with their relationship problems. She revealed that everyone in his circle called him the professor because of the expert guidance he provided. In his chat logs, Jin Young was a master of relationships who told his friends exactly how to please their partners and how to use various techniques to improve their relationships. His advice was so effective that one friend even credited him for saving his marriage. However, the reality was far less impressive than his online persona suggested. Despite being 26 years old, Jin Young had never even held a girl's hand in real life. All of his vast knowledge was purely theoretical, gathered from countless hours of studying various cardio training videos and articles on the internet. He was essentially a master of theory with absolutely zero practical experience. In a desperate attempt to save his pride, Jin Young insisted that he was highly experienced and had been with many people. This was exactly what Bomb was hoping to hear because she felt left out when her friends talked about their own experiences. She looked her older brother in the eye and asked him to give her a secret cardio lesson so she wouldn't feel so uninformed anymore. Jin Young was stunned by the request and reminded himself that even though they weren't blood related, he was still her older brother. He couldn't understand how she could even think of something so ridiculous and wondered if the stress of college had finally made her lose her mind. For the next week, Jin Young did everything in his power to avoid her. He stayed out late at the hospital with friends, attended memorial services, and even locked himself in the bathroom for hours pretending to have a stomachache. He hoped that if he just ignored the situation long enough, the problem would simply go away. But his luck ran out when he returned home one night to find Bomb waiting for him in the dark. She was clearly fed up with his avoidance and warned him that if he tried to lock his door again, there would be serious trouble. After a long shower to calm his nerves, Jin Young retreated to his room and tried to convince himself that she would eventually be reasonable. He lay on his bed, listening to the silence of the house and hoping she had finally gone to sleep. He figured he could just talk some sense into her the next morning since she was in big girl now. Just as he started to relax and feel safe, he heard the unmistakable sound of a door opening down the hall. His heart began to race as he realized she was heading straight for his room. Before he'd even come up with a plan, the handle turned and Bomb walked right in, proving that his night of peace was officially over. Bomb makes herself at home on Jin Young's bed, leaving him with a strange sense of dread even though he hasn't done anything wrong yet. She expects him to begin the promised lesson immediately, but Jin Young finds himself stumbling over his words and accidentally mentioning details that only make things more awkward. He quickly realizes his mistake and tries to redirect her curiosity by suggesting she watch some educational videos first. Bomb remains skeptical because her friends told her that such things are mostly just acting, but Jin Young insists that these videos cover all the necessary basics. He tries to convince her to go watch them on her own, but Bomb has a different plan and insists that he should be the one to show her. Her determined gaze makes it impossible for him to refuse, so he eventually gives in and starts browsing for a suitable video on his phone. They sit together and debate the merits of different styles, eventually deciding that a domestic video would be easier for her to understand. Jin Young tries to maintain a respectful distance while he searches, but Bomb leans in, causing him to panic and realize how much trouble he is truly in. After texting her the link, Jin Young attempts a quick escape by claiming he has to meet a friend, but Bomb is way ahead of him. She demands that he stay to provide a live commentary as they watch together. She even uses a bit of sibling blackmail, threatening to show their mother what he sent her if he doesn't stay put. Left with no other choice, Jin Young settles onto the bed and tries to convince himself that this is no different than watching videos with his buddies. His attempt at being professional is immediately ruined when the video starts with the volume at a dangerously high level, causing him to worry about their parents suddenly returning home. As the video plays, Bomb becomes fascinated by the exaggerated expressions on screen and wonders if people actually look like that in real life. Jin Young clarifies that what she is seeing isn't exactly normal and is mostly just for the camera. Bomb continues her play-by-play analysis, noting that the intensity seems more like a difficult gym workout than a cardio encounter. She eventually decides that the whole process looks a bit unappealing and even compares certain visuals to things she finds quite gross. Jin Young tries to defend the natural beauty of the human body, but Baum remains unconvinced and starts demonstrating her own awkward personal habits to prove how she avoids looking at herself. She begins to tease Jin Young for his obvious embarrassment, laughing as his face turns a bright shade of red. When she gets a little too near, Jin Young reaches his limit and tries to push her away. The resulting struggle leads to them both tumbling across the bed in a chaotic mess. Jin Young ends up in a very compromising position, realizing that his attempt to be a responsible teacher has only led to a complete disaster. Just as things reached a peak of tension, the sound of the front door opening brought their secret cardio lesson to a sudden halt. Their parents had arrived home early with a box of fried chicken, forcing a frantic scramble for clothes and composure. Baum managed to rush out of the room first to provide a distraction, while Jin Young remained hidden and waited for his heart rate to return to normal. When they finally gathered at the dinner table, the atmosphere was heavy with unspoken tension as their mother suspiciously noted that Baum seemed to be coming from the wrong hallway. Baum quickly changed the subject to the spicy chicken, even going so far as to whisper a reminder to Jin Young about exactly what he had seen earlier. Their resulting bickering led to a fake argument about a stolen diary, which clearly tested their father's patience until their mother intervened with a toast to family harmony. Life continued the next day at the convenience store, but Jin Young was far from focused on his work. His mind kept drifting back to the events in his bedroom, and he had to shake himself to stay grounded. His distraction did not go unnoticed by his boss, a confident woman who enjoyed teasing him with playful affection. When he mentioned that a girl had been asking him for advice, she could not help but laugh at the idea of him being anyone's teacher. She correctly guessed that the girl must be completely inexperienced and decided that Jin Young was the one who actually needed a real-world education. She used his habit of snacking on the store's inventory as leverage to make him kneel right there in the middle of the aisle. Despite his protests about the location and the time of day, he found himself following her command as she stood over him, ready to provide a very different kind of lesson. Back at the convenience store, Jin Young found himself in an increasingly awkward position as his boss decided to take his education into her own hands. She claimed that her lessons were a form of self-sacrifice and that he should be grateful for the chance to learn real-world techniques. Jin Young was completely overwhelmed by her aggressive approach and could not help but realize that actual contact was far more intense than any internet theory he had ever read. This spontaneous training session was cut short by the sound of the store bell, prompting Jin Young to flee the scene in a state of total confusion, while his boss was left wondering about the secrets of his household. Returning home later that night, Jin Young attempted to sneak into his room unnoticed, but his hopes for a peaceful evening were quickly shattered. He ran into his stepmother first, and then the ever-vigilant Baum, who immediately started mocking him for his quick exit earlier that day. She accused him of being a coward who could not handle a simple lesson, making him feel like a stranger in his own house. Exhausted and frustrated, he retreated to his bedroom and collapsed onto his bed, wishing the ground would simply swallow him whole. His solitude was brief, as Baum followed him into the room and locked the door behind her. She launched into a dramatic performance, crying about her future reputation and demanding an even exchange for what he had seen earlier. She even started crawling on the floor to emphasize her distress, which made Jin Young realize just how far she was willing to go to get her way. After a frantic struggle, Jin Young finally reached his limit and decided to end the debate once and for all. He stood up with a look of grim determination and provided Baum with the one good view she had been demanding, hoping that this final act of transparency would finally bring him some peace. After that, they started an intense cardio session. After the chaotic end of their encounter, Jin Young lay on the floor in a state of total shock while Baum looked down at the unexpected evidence of his earlier enthusiasm. She complained that she only wanted a small glimpse into the world of big people and certainly hadn't asked for such an overwhelming display of his reaction. Jin Young could only mutter that she was the one who pushed the situation to the edge, as a sudden knock on the door brought their world crashing down. His stepmother called out from the hallway, telling Baum to stop bothering her brother and come out for dinner. The bedroom immediately turned into a scene from a frantic comedy as the two of them scrambled to hide the evidence and getting prepared before the door was opened. Jin Young desperately tried to wipe down the area while tossing Baum an oversized shirt to cover herself, arguing about her damp clothes while the handle rattled ominously. Bomb barely managed to pull on some pants and settle into a somewhat convincing posture just as her mother entered the room. The tension was thick enough to cut as the mother questioned why the door had been locked and why Bomb was wearing her brother's baggy clothes. Bomb proved to be a master of deception, quickly spinning a lie about catching a sudden cold while searching for a lost diary. Jin Young pretended to be sound asleep, hoping his racing heart wouldn't give him away. When his mother noticed a strange, lingering scent in the room, Jin Young felt his life flash before his eyes until Bomb saved the day with another brilliant lie about burning fish in the kitchen. Once they were gone, Jin Young finally sat up and marveled at how his sister could lie with such a straight face, though he was left feeling deeply conflicted about how much he had actually enjoyed their secret cardio moment. The following day at work was another exercise in distraction, as Jin Young found himself unable to focus on stacking boxes in the storage room. He worried about the leverage Bomb now had over him and feared she would use their secret cardio encounter to harass him indefinitely. His internal crisis was interrupted when his manager entered and locked the door behind her, immediately sensing that something significant had happened the night before. She teased him relentlessly, claiming he looked like he had finally gained some real experience and suggesting that she still had plenty of lessons to teach him. When the manager pinned him down and pointed out that his body was clearly reacting to her presence, Jin Young reached his breaking point. He returned home that night feeling completely drained, realizing that his own house had become a place of constant tension rather than comfort. As he lay on his bed, reflecting on the speed at which his life had changed, he noticed something tucked away in the sheets. He found a pair of Bomb's shorts that had been left behind in the previous night's scramble and found himself captivated by the scent that lingered on the fabric. Driven by a mix of curiosity and lingering desire, Jin Young began to use the laundry as a way to relive the encounter, unaware that the door was about to open. Bomb walked in on him at the most humiliating moment possible, immediately labeling him a disoriented fraud for what he was doing with her clothes. She threatened to shout for their mother, but Jin Young finally snapped and pinned her against the door to keep her quiet. He called her out for being a hypocrite, noting that her body had reacted just as strongly as his during their session. Determined to finally take control of the situation, Jin Young told her that he was done being taken advantage of and intended to finish the lesson she had demanded. He insisted that since they had unfinished business, it was only fair that he got to explore her world just as she had explored his. Bomb was stunned by his sudden shift in confidence and realized that the dynamic between them had permanently shifted. She eventually settled onto the bed with a look of quiet resignation, telling him to go ahead and do exactly what he wanted to do. Jin Young found himself at the convenience store the next day, struggling to keep his mind on the job, while his thoughts constantly drifted back to his complicated situation at home. He felt incredibly uneasy and wondered how he was ever going to look his sister in the eye again after everything that had transpired. His mental spiral was interrupted by his boss, who seemed to have a sixth sense for his moods. She leaned in and noted that he looked quite different from the day before, as if he had finally crossed a threshold into adulthood. Jin Young tried to brush it off with a panicked denial, but his boss simply laughed and assigned him to organize the new deliveries before heading out herself. Just as he began to feel a moment of peace, the store bell rang, and Bomb walked in, looking far too composed for someone who had caused a family crisis just hours ago. Jin Young was instantly on guard and asked her why she had finished school so early and what she was doing at his place of work. Bomb claimed she simply wanted them to walk home together, though Jin Young was certain she had a more complicated plan in mind. He told her she would have to wait until his shift ended, but the arrival of his manager complicated things even further. The manager was immediately curious about the pretty young woman waiting in the store, and when Jin Young introduced her as his sister, she began to evaluate Bomb with a very critical eye. She made several forward comments about her appearance, even noting that she was quite blessed in several areas. Jin Young was horrified as his boss continued to tease them, eventually dismissing him for the day with a playful smack and a wish for him to do his best. The walk home was anything but normal as Bomb suddenly veered off the main path and dragged Jin Young toward a secluded staircase. Jin Young was exhausted and pleaded with her to just let them go home, but Bomb was determined to show him something important. Once they were alone, she revealed that she was still dealing with the messy aftermath of their earlier lesson. To his absolute disbelief, she showed him that she had not quite been able to clear everything up yet, leaving Jin Young completely speechless at the turn of events. Just as the lesson reached its peak, the world came to a screeching halt as a familiar voice called out to them from the stairs. Their mother had followed them into the shadows and caught them in the most compromising position imaginable, leaving both Jin Young and Bomb staring in absolute horror as their secret cardio world was exposed in the bright light of day. Their mother stood before them on the stairs, demanding an immediate explanation for their strange behavior in the secluded corner. Jin Young was frozen in a state of pure terror, while Bomb scrambled to hide the evidence of their earlier encounter. She blurted out a frantic lie about doing some late-night stretches to warm up her body, though their mother found the whole thing incredibly suspicious, since Bomb had supposedly given up her dancing dreams long ago. The situation turned from awkward to disastrous when their mother spotted a small white garment on the ground and prepared to pick it up. Bomb snatched it away with a dramatic display of mock disgust, claiming it was far too sussy for anyone to touch, and quickly diverted her mother's attention toward the nearby grocery store. As she dragged their mother away, Jin Young noticed that the visible aftermath of their secret cardio session was still quite apparent on his sister, leaving him to wonder how she could be so reckless. Dinner was an exercise in extreme tension, and Jin Young hurried through his meal just to escape the heavy atmosphere of the family table. He retreated to his room to hide from the chaos, but he eventually had to venture out to the bathroom to finish his nightly routine. He found it incredibly difficult to act like a normal sibling after sharing such an intense cardio secret, and his attempt at solitude was ruined when Bomb burst in to join him. She insisted on brushing her teeth at the exact same time, even going so far as to step on his slipper to maintain her balance in the cramped space. Jin Young tried to maintain his composure, but the forced closeness made his head spin with confusion. When Bomb accidentally used too much hand soap, she forced Jin Young to take the excess, leading to a lingering moment of shared contact over the sink. Just before she hurried out of the bathroom, she leaned in and whispered a clear command for him not to lock his bedroom door later that night. Jin Young was left staring at his reflection in a state of total disbelief as she disappeared back into the hallway. He spent the next hour lying in the dark and staring at the ceiling, trying to anticipate whatever scheme his sister was cooking up next. He eventually decided to give her a silent 5-second countdown, figuring that if she didn't arrive by the end of it, he would simply give up and try to get some sleep. Right as he reached the end of his mental count, the door handle turned and Bomb walked into the room as promised. Jin Young immediately closed his eyes and began a very unconvincing performance of being fast asleep, hoping to avoid any further complications. Bomb approached the bed and let out a disappointed sigh, clearly frustrated that her brother hadn't been able to stay awake for her arrival. She stood there reflecting on the unfinished business from earlier that day and decided that she couldn't wait any longer for his cooperation. She climbed onto the bed and settled into a dominant position on top of him, leaving Jin Young to wonder exactly how much longer he could pretend to be unconscious. Jin Young found himself back at the store where the manager continued to keep him on his toes with her increasingly bold claims. She suggested that their previous time together had permanently altered her expectations, leaving Jin Young to wonder how he had suddenly become responsible for her entire outlook on cardio sessions. She insisted that he needed to take full accountability for the situation, which led to a very impromptu training session right there in the middle of the workspace. Jin Young marveled at the fact that they were in the middle of a great technological era where everyone was so preoccupied with their mobile devices that nobody even noticed the intense lesson taking place behind the counter. The situation took a turn for the bizarre when the manager decided that they needed to document their progress for future review. She ignored Jin Young's concerns about privacy and his lack of celebrity status, forcing him to take over the camera duties so she could focus entirely on her role as an instructor. Jin Young found himself in the surreal position of filming his own education while pedestrians walked by just outside the window, completely oblivious to the scene. The intensity of the training began to reach a fever pitch, and the manager reminded him that he would need to be very careful with his timing when they reached the final stage of the lesson. Just as things were about to reach a natural conclusion, the store bell rang and a confused customer wandered in looking for specific hygiene products. Jin Young and the manager were forced into a stiff and awkward pose behind the counter, trying their best to look like regular employees while their hearts were racing. The manager attempted to keep her composure, giving the man frantic directions to the correct aisle while Jin Young struggled to hold back his own overwhelming response. The customer's inability to find what he needed finally pushed the manager over the edge, causing her to snap and yell at him to handle the search himself. This sudden burst of tension and frustration proved to be the breaking point for Jin Young's self-control. Everything reached a sudden and messy end, right there behind the counter, just as the customer's girlfriend called him out of the store. The couple left feeling very strange about the service they had received, leaving the store in a heavy silence. Jin Young was filled with immediate regret and apologized for his lack of control during the final moments. The manager was too exhausted to even argue, simply staring off into space and realizing that some lessons were much more complicated than either of them had anticipated. Jin Young walked into the quiet apartment and assumed he was finally alone for the evening, only to be surprised by Bomb sitting silently on the sofa with a television playing in the background. He realized his mistake and wondered why she hadn't said anything when he first walked in, but Bomb simply explained that their parents would be coming home late again, which only added to the lingering tension in the room. Jin Young tried to keep things casual by pouring himself a drink and asking how her day at school had been, but Bomb sat there with a heavy expression and noted that things were mostly fine except for one specific problem that was his fault. She looked at him with a piercing gaze and revealed that she had been struggling to walk properly all day because of his earlier lack of control. Jin Young felt a wave of guilt and immediately apologized for the aftermath of their secret cardio lesson, realizing how difficult it must have been for her to navigate campus while dealing with the mess he had left behind. Despite the massive awkwardness of the situation, Jin Young found himself unable to look away from her, and when Bomb told him to stop staring before he burned a hole through her, he decided to be stubborn and refused to avert his eyes. She called him completely immature for his behavior, but Jin Young decided to lean into the insult rather than fight it. He started acting like a helpless baby, claiming he was hungry and needed someone to take care of him right that second. Bomb was clearly caught off guard by his sudden shift in personality and found the whole performance to be incredibly cringy. And even Jin Young started to realize that he might be pushing the joke a bit too far as he hovered over her on the sofa. However, his ridiculous act actually worked to break the ice, and Bomb eventually laughed at his nonsense. She decided to play along and agreed to cook him something to eat, since her big baby brother was apparently so hungry, and Jin Young felt a moment of relief as the heavy atmosphere finally started to lift. Then they started a cardio session to relieve hunger. Later, they were in the shower. The sudden voice of their stepmother outside the bathroom door sent Jin Young and Bomb into a state of absolute panic. She was complaining about Bomb's habit of leaving clothes everywhere, and decided to come inside to handle things personally. Jin Young barely had time to realize the door wasn't locked before she walked right in, leaving both of them staring in stunned silence as they scrambled to maintain some shred of dignity. Their mother seemed entirely unfazed by the situation and began lecturing Bomb about the importance of privacy now that she was a big girl. She pointed out how awkward it would be if Jin Young had walked in on her like this, completely unaware that he was currently standing just inches away behind the stall. Jin Young stood frozen as he realized that things were about to get much more complicated because his mother was also feeling quite sweaty and decided it was the perfect time for a shared family wash-up session. She began to prepare with a casual confidence that left Bomb feeling completely scandalized. Bomb started shouting at her to stop and tried to push her out of the room, but her mother simply laughed it off as a natural part of being comfortable with one's own daughter. Jin Young remained hidden in the corner, desperately trying to cover his eyes and wishing he could simply vanish into thin air, while the two women argued over the boundary between being grown up and being part of a family. Sensing a small opening, Jin Young tried to make a break for the exit while his mother's back was turned. The situation took an even more dangerous turn when his mother noticed a strange substance on the floor. Jin Young felt his stomach drop as she reached down to investigate, but Bomb realized they were seconds away from total exposure. She grabbed the showerhead and unleashed a blast of freezing cold water, soaking everything in sight, including her confused mother. She shouted a frantic explanation that the mess was just a combination of soap and various hair products, providing just enough of a distraction for Jin Young to hopefully survive the most stressful shower of his life. The chaotic shower situation finally comes to an end as Bomb successfully pushes her mother out of the bathroom, leaving the older woman to wonder if her daughter is simply having a recurring bad day. Back inside, The atmosphere is incredibly tense as Bomb turns her sharp gaze toward Jin Young and accuses him of having a very sussy reaction to seeing her mother in such a state. Jin Young is mortified and tries to explain that it was all a complete misunderstanding, insisting that his response was actually triggered by his earlier cardio session with Bomb rather than her mother. Bomb is far from convinced and throws one last insult his way, telling him he might as well do whatever he wants with her mother before storming out and leaving him alone in the quiet room. Left to his own thoughts, Jin Young can only strike the wall in a fit of frustration over his own lack of control and the ridiculous nature of his life. He eventually heads out for his night shift, walking through the city streets while trying to process the confusing logic of the women around him and his own internal struggles. He arrives at the convenience store feeling completely drained, only to find that his workplace is currently a scene of high drama involving a very difficult individual. A massive and aggressive customer is currently berating his blonde coworker over the small cost of a plastic bag, and the situation looks like it might turn violent at any second. Jin Young decides this is his chance to act like a responsible big boy and steps in with a serious face, reminding the man that there are rules everyone must follow. His attempt at being a hero ends almost instantly when the large man delivers a single, powerful punch that sends Jin Young crashing into the storage bins in a very ungraceful heap. While Jin Young is busy contemplating his life choices on the floor, his coworker doesn't even flinch and calmly picks up what looks like a phone to call the authorities. She begins reciting specific legal articles and potential prison sentences for assault and intimidation with the cold precision of an expert. The customer is so intimidated by her apparent knowledge of the criminal code that he turns tail and runs out of the store before things can escalate further. The blonde coworker watches him go with a bored expression, revealing that she was actually just talking into a barcode scanner the entire time to trick the man. She tells a humiliated Jin Young that it is finally safe to get up, though he is far too embarrassed to show his face after being defeated so easily. She eventually convinces him to sit still so she can treat the scrape on his cheek, playfully mocking him for jumping into a fight he clearly could not handle. Jin Young is impressed by her ability to cite the law so fluently and learns that she is actually a first-year pre-law student who happens to be the same age as his sister. He suggests that since they are so close in age, she should start referring to him by a more friendly title, but she flatly refuses and notes that any man who fails to recognize her as a woman is simply an old man in her eyes. She leans in with a sudden and intense focus, leaving Jin Young feeling more flustered and confused about his workplace dynamics than ever before. The medical session at the convenience store concludes as Jin Young's coworker finishes applying the final bandage, though she cannot help but continue her playful teasing about his failed heroics. Jin Young defends his actions by stating that no real man could simply stand by and watch a woman get hurt, a sentiment that seems to strike a hidden chord within her. A brief shadow crosses her face as she reflects on a difficult childhood spent watching her own mother endure a similar fate at the hands of a cruel father, which explains why she became so fiercely independent and knowledgeable about the law. After the shift ends, Jin Young returns home to find his stepmother busy in the kitchen. She explains that his sister is currently resting because she caught a sudden summer cold. Jin Young retreats to his own room but finds himself unable to focus on anything besides the silent house and the nagging feeling that his sister might simply be avoiding him because of their previous disagreement. He lies in the dark and listens to the quiet music on his phone, eventually deciding that he would not be a very good brother if he did not go in to check on her health. He slips into the dark room at 1:30 in the morning and finds the door thankfully unlocked. The sight of her resting peacefully triggers a wave of intense longing, and he convinces himself that she likely already forgave him for his past behavior. He begins to show his affection by waking her up and starting a cardio session while their mother was sleeping. The morning sun rises over the apartment complex as the household begins to stir after a very confusing night. Jin Young's mother wakes up feeling a bit disoriented and notices that her clothes are a mess, making her wonder exactly what happened before she fell asleep and where her daughter might have disappeared so early in the day. Across the hall, Jin Young is still lost in a deep sleep until his phone begins to ring incessantly. It is Bomb calling from her university campus with an urgent request for a B-stick she left on her desk. Jin Young tries to argue that he is currently very busy with his own dreams, but his sister is not in the mood for jokes. She reminds him that if he continues to be lazy, The metaphorical bomb they are both carrying might just go off at the wrong time. Driven by a mix of responsibility and a slight fear of his sister's temper, Jin Young makes his way to the large campus and marvels at how much bigger it is than he expected. He soon spots Bomb running toward him with her usual high-energy pace, and he cannot help but worry that her enthusiastic greeting might cause a bit of a wardrobe malfunction. She quickly grabs the drive from his hand and prepares to rush back to her classes, but the arrival of her friend Sujung brings the entire exchange to a sudden halt. Sujung is dressed in a bold red outfit and possesses an even bolder personality that immediately puts Jin Young on edge. She wastes no time introducing herself and latches onto his arm with a level of closeness that makes him quite uncomfortable. She suggests that since he is such a helpful older brother, he should definitely treat her to a meal, or at least a coffee. Bomb is clearly mortified by her friend's behavior and tries to pull her away, especially when Sujung mentions a certain legendary title that sounds far too close to Jin Young's secret online identity. While Bomb runs off to submit her assignment, Jin Young finds himself trapped in a nearby cafe with Sujung, who seems determined to peel back every layer of his private life. She immediately brings up the fact that he and Bomb are not blood-related and asks if he ever feels a spark of attraction when they are together. Jin Young nearly chokes on his drink as she continues her interrogation, revealing that Bomb had shared some very specific and impressive details about his attributes. Sujung uses her own forearm to illustrate the measurements she heard about and even mimics certain rhythmic cardio movements to describe the stories she was told. Jin Young tries his best to play the role of the innocent and confused brother, but his face is practically glowing with embarrassment as Sujung describes the final stages of a typical cardio encounter. Thankfully, Bomb returns to the cafe just as the conversation reaches its most dangerous point, and Jin Young is more than ready to escape the interrogation. Sujung makes a graceful exit while leaving behind a few more playful comments that only add to the lingering tension. Jin Young attempts to head off to his work shift, but Bomb is so caught up in trying to explain away her friend's weird behavior that she trips over her own feet. Before Jin Young can even react to save her, a handsome classmate named Junggun appears out of the blue and catches her in a perfect movie-style embrace. Jin Young can only stand by and watch in silence as his sister looks up at the new arrival with a visible blush, realizing that his complicated life just added another unexpected player to the mix. The introduction of Kim Jong-un turns into a literal test of strength as the handsome classmate delivers a handshake so powerful that Jin Young wonders if his hand will ever be the same again. Bomb quickly clarifies the situation by explaining that Jin Young is her older brother, prompting a very apologetic bow from the new arrival. Junggun even offers to treat Jin Young to a meal as a peace offering, but Bomb is suspiciously eager to get her brother out of the way. She insists that he is far too busy with his work shift and practically shoves him out of the cafe, while demanding that her classmate buy her expensive snacks instead. As Jin Young walks through the streets, he finds himself haunted by a sudden wave of paranoia regarding the relationship between his sister and the new guy. His imagination takes a dark turn as he visualizes Bomb sharing her secrets with Junggun, using a stick of candied fruit as a very vivid and disturbing mental metaphor for things he would rather not think about. He realizes he is in a complete panic and tries to shake the image from his head, but the thought of his sister being close with someone else leaves him feeling incredibly unsettled. He arrives at the convenience store, bracing himself for a lecture about being late, only to find his manager in a strangely quiet and demure mood. She is acting so out of character that Jin Young feels a deep sense of suspicion, especially when she insists on handling the heavy lifting in the storage room herself. His instincts prove correct when a sudden scream sends him racing to the back of the store to find her sprawled on the floor after a box supposedly fell on her. The rescue attempt goes from helpful to humiliating in a matter of seconds as Jin Young tries to help her up. He realizes with a sense of dread that his recent lessons with Bomb have ruined his social filter, as he finds himself far too comfortable with direct contact in a professional setting. The situation reaches a peak of disaster when the manager loses her balance and accidentally pulls his pants down in a frantic attempt to stay upright. Jin Young stands frozen in a state of absolute shock as his current reaction is exposed to the bright lights of the storage room. The manager makes a quick and polite exit while thanking him for his troubles, leaving Jin Young alone to scream his lungs out in total frustration. He eventually returns home at the end of the day feeling like the entire world has a personal vendetta against his dignity. While resting on his bed, he tries to make sense of his relationship with his sister, noting that they have certainly crossed many lines, but haven't quite reached the status of a normal couple. He realizes that despite everything they have shared, they haven't even experienced a basic introduction of cardio session yet. His reflections are interrupted by Bomb herself, who enters the room looking for the next phase of their secret cardio lesson. When Jin Young claims he is too tired and tells her to go eat dinner first, she lets out a disappointed sigh and mentions that she had actually planned on providing a special appetizer before the main meal. As she walks out of the room with a huff, Jin Young is left staring into space and realizing that he might have just missed the very thing he was longing for. Jin Young tries to pin down their relationship status once and for all, but Bomb cannot resist teasing him by suggesting they have a very mechanical and purely dynamic. This joke backfires as Jin Young takes it to heart, feeling more like a convenient tool than a brother or a partner. He decides he has had enough for one night and retreats to his own room while ignoring her apologies, and she watches him go with a playful smirk because she finds his grumpy behavior surprisingly endearing. Sleep brings no peace for Jin Young, as his mind conjures up a vivid and painful fantasy of his sister and her handsome classmate sharing a sugary treat in the most cardio way possible. He thrashes around in his bed while shouting at the imaginary versions of them before waking up in a cold sweat of pure frustration. He tries to convince himself that they are just normal siblings and that he should not care who she spends her time with, but his racing heart proves he is failing miserably at staying detached. Bomb eventually finds her way into his room to see if his mood has improved, but Jin Young is still caught in a spiral of petty jealousy. He tells her to go back to her precious snacks and her new friend, making it painfully obvious exactly what is bothering him. Bomb finally realizes that her big brother is truly envious of the attention she gave her classmate, and she finds the revelation absolutely hilarious until she decides it is time to change the atmosphere. In a sudden move that catches him completely off guard, she leans in and provides a real-world lesson, turning his jealousy into a state of stunned silence. She explains that while she started out looking for a simple appetizer, things have clearly moved straight to the dessert phase of their evening. Jin Young is so overwhelmed by the contact that he immediately demands an encore, arguing that it makes no sense for them to have shared so many intense moments without the simple introduction of a cardio. Bomb looks him in the eye and reveals that she was saving that moment for someone she truly cared about, which makes Jin Young realize that her feelings run much deeper than he ever dared to imagine. She confirms that she actually likes him, prompting a wave of relief and joy. As they sit there together, Jin Young wonders what they are supposed to call themselves now, but Bomb simply hints that she has a secret plan for their future, and they starts a cardio session. The morning light brings a fresh wave of panic, as Jin Young and Bomb realize that their secret late-night cardio session occurred behind a door that was never actually locked. Bomb frantically checks the hallway and discovers that their parents have already left for work, meaning they somehow survived another night on the edge of total exposure. Jin Young is a nervous wreck while Bomb tries to act like nothing happened, eventually dragging him toward the elevator so they can start their day. The ride down is filled with a heavy silence as Jin Young continues to obsess over the odds of being caught. Bomb eventually loses her patience and mocks him for being such a coward, reminding him that he had no problem being bold when they were actually in the heat of the moment. Just as the tension between them begins to soften into a sweet moment of hand-holding, the elevator doors open to reveal a nosy neighbor. The woman immediately assumes they are a couple, forcing Bomb to quickly clarify that they are siblings. The neighbor is clearly impressed by Jin Young's looks and tries to set him up on a blind date with her own daughter, which sends Bomb into a quiet fit of possessive rage. She bluntly lies and claims that her brother already has a girlfriend, ending the matchmaking attempt before it can even begin. Once they are outside, Bomb continues her streak of jealousy by insisting that the neighbor's daughter is not even pretty, and warning Jin Young not to let his mind wander. Their walk is cut short when Jin Young explains that he has to head to the convenience store early to fill a shift. Bomb is visibly annoyed because she expected him to walk her all the way to her classes, and she storms off with a dramatic stomp that leaves Jin Young wondering exactly what he did wrong this time. He arrives at the store feeling completely drained from the lack of sleep and the constant emotional whiplash. He spends his time worrying that his law student coworker might be preparing a legal case against him for his earlier clumsy behavior, but his spiraling thoughts are interrupted by the arrival of his boss. She is in high spirits and wastes no time teasing him about his racing heart, even using her own presence to keep him flustered and off balance. She eventually disappears into the storage room to organize a new shipment, leaving Jin Young alone with his thoughts. He spends his break texting Bomb, and the conversation quickly turns into a series of bold and suggestive messages that make him realize just how much he misses her already. His daydreams are interrupted when his boss calls him into the back room for an emergency, only for him to find her waiting in a very unprofessional state. She forces him to a cardio session. Jin-young can only marvel at the fact that his life has become more exaggerated than a scripted drama, yet he finds himself unable to look away. After finishing his work 2 hours early, Jin-young rushes to the university campus to surprise Bomb as a way to make up for their earlier bickering. He realizes he has no idea where her classes are and ends up crossing paths with her eccentric friend Soo-jung. The bold young woman is convinced he came there just to see her and quickly hijacks his phone to exchange numbers. They settle onto a bench to wait for Bomb, but the peace is short-lived as Soo-jung reveals she has been losing sleep over a very specific detail. She looks him in the eye and asks for a definitive answer regarding the legendary rumors she heard about his workout gear size, leaving Jin-young to choke on his own breath in the middle of the crowded campus. Soo-jung is far from satisfied with a simple denial and warns Jin-young that she knows far too much for his comfort. She jokingly threatens to broadcast his secrets to the entire world, including his parents, and even the national news stations if he does not cooperate. Jin-young's imagination immediately runs wild with a terrifying vision of his life falling apart in a spectacular fashion. He sees himself being chased by a very angry father and featured on a breaking news report as a total villain. The imaginary news cycle features dramatized testimonies from every woman he knows, who all turn against him to demand the harshest possible penalties, while the public calls for his immediate downfall. Terrified by his own dark daydreams, Jin-young decides that a small compromise is better than total social destruction. He tells Soo-jung that he understands the situation and will allow her to confirm the rumors as long as she promises to keep her mouth shut afterward. Soo-jung is thrilled by the success of her blackmail and wastes no time getting much closer than she should. Jin-young tries to distract his mind by mentally reciting the national anthem, but the direct contact from a relative stranger is a completely new and overwhelming feeling that begins to break down his defenses. The situation takes a turn for the chaotic when Soo-jung's energetic movements cause her own outfit to struggle under the pressure. Jin-young is completely caught in the headlights as Soo-jung marvels at the reality of the stories she heard from Bomb. Just as things reach a peak of awkwardness, the actual sister arrives on the scene and catches them in a position that is impossible to explain. Bomb is absolutely livid and storms away without a second thought, leaving Jin-young to chase after her, while Soo-jung is left on the ground contemplating the impressive truth of the rumors she just verified. Jin-young eventually catches up to his sister on the street and tries to convince her that the entire scene was one giant misunderstanding. Bomb is not interested in excuses and points out his history of being a bit too comfortable with the various women in his life. She demands to know who he actually prefers, putting him on the spot with a very blunt question about the merits of her mother versus her friend. Realizing that honesty and a bit of bold flattery are his only paths to survival, he tells her that she is the only one who is a perfect fit for him, and that neither of the other women could ever compare to her. This bold move actually works to melt her icy exterior, as her anger quickly turns into a much more playful interest. She grabs his hand and leads him toward a more private location, leaving Jin-young to wonder what kind of intense lesson his sister has planned for him this time. They reached an alleyway and started a cardio session there. Jin-young finds himself increasingly worried about the long-term consequences of their secret cardio lessons, even going so far as to wonder if his sister is trying to lure him into a permanent family commitment. Bomb is genuinely confused by his complicated terminology and eventually makes him realize that she is much too young to be thinking about such heavy life changes. He decides to drop the lecture entirely when she offers a very blunt and unintended compliment regarding his health, leaving him at a total loss for words as they walk through the quiet evening streets. Jin-young and Bomb return home only to be immediately intercepted by their mother. The atmosphere turns freezing cold when the older woman notices a very visible and suspicious mess on her daughter's leggings. Bomb doesn't skip a beat and spins a blatant lie about accidentally spilling coffee, maintaining such a perfect poker face that Jin-young is genuinely terrified of her deceptive skills. The situation takes a turn for the bizarre when their mother decides to conduct a full sensory investigation, sniffing the air and even tasting the evidence before concluding that the coffee must have gone bad. She notes with the expertise of a connoisseur that the flavor profile is far too acidic, comparing it unfavorably to a specific brand of high-end beans. Just as the two siblings think they are in the clear, their mother mentions their behavior from earlier that morning. Jin Young's heart nearly stops as he recalls the unlocked door incident, but he eventually realizes that his mother was only apologizing for sleeping in and failing to provide them with a proper breakfast. They managed to escape to their rooms after a very awkward dinner, but the lingering look on their mother's face suggests she might be much more observant than she lets on. Later that night, Jin Young is sent into a fresh spiral of panic in a text exchange when Baum reveals that their mother spent most of dinner staring at the very obvious marks he left on her neck. He begins to feel like they are living out the plot of a very poorly written and scandalous comic book where everything is destined to fall apart. In a desperate attempt to regain his composure and save his soul, he sits cross-legged on his bed and begins chanting ancient mantras to ward off his own desires and any potential evil spirits. His attempt at spiritual enlightenment is interrupted when Baum walks into the room and mocks him for his sudden interest in meditation. Jin Young tries to argue that they need to exercise extreme self-control to avoid a family catastrophe, but Baum is far more relaxed about the situation. She points out that their mother would likely just assume she has a random boyfriend, rather than suspecting her own brother. When Jin Young continues to plead for a bit of distance, his own body betrays his words, proving that his resolve is much weaker than he claimed. Baum finds his inner conflict to be quite charming and reveals that while their outdoor adventures were fun, the thrill of potentially being caught at home makes everything feel even more intense. She settles onto the floor and prepares to lead the next cardio session, leaving Jin Young to realize that his days as a monk are officially over. The peaceful atmosphere of the bedroom is shattered by a sudden knock that sounds like a countdown to disaster. Baum and Jin Young scramble in a state of absolute panic as they realize their mother is just outside the door and ready to investigate the late-night silence. Jin Young barely manages to prepare before opening the door just a crack, hoping his nervous sweating looks like a normal reaction to being woken up. His mother immediately notices a strange and lingering aroma in the air, forcing Jin Young to block the entrance with a lie about his room being far too messy for guests. The tension only increases as his mother begins to reflect on how much he has grown up, noting that his secretive behavior is perfectly normal for a big boy. Jin Young can only offer a series of forced laughs while his sister listens from behind the door in a state of pure confusion. The conversation takes a dangerous turn when his mother reveals her true suspicions, asking if he has noticed any signs of Baum having a secret boyfriend. Jin Young struggles to maintain his composure as she worries about her daughter dating some nameless loser, all while he silently acknowledges that he is the very person she is so concerned about. Just as he thinks the interrogation is over, his mother decides it is the perfect time to check on her daughter personally. Jin Young realizes he is seconds away from a total family collapse and tries to block the hallway, claiming his sister is already deep in sleep. His mother finds this hard to believe since her daughter usually stays up until the early hours of the morning lost in her video games. In a moment of absolute desperation, Jin Young reaches out and grabs her arm, stopping her progress with a look of frantic determination. Knowing he needs a distraction of epic proportions, Jin Young pulls his mother and begins to sing a very loud and dramatic rendition of a classic hymn. He rambles on about how grateful he is for her motherly care, spinning her around the hallway while his sister uses the opening to sprint toward her own room. To ensure his mother stays away from the danger zone, he begins to compliment the hard-working state of her hands and lures her into his own room with the promise of some high-quality hand lotion he brought home from work. Baum barely manages to settle into her chair and put on her headphones before her mother enters the room to continue her investigation. The older woman is still skeptical and notices a suspicious dampness on her daughter's clothing, prompting another round of sensory checks that leave Baum frozen in fear. She manages to brush it off as a simple spill, but the lingering look on her mother's face suggests that the woman's intuition is working overtime. Once he is finally alone, Jin Young collapses against his door in a state of pure terror, realizing that his life has become a high-stakes game of survival. He reflects on how dangerously close they came to losing everything and wonders how much longer they can continue this secret dance. While the two siblings catch their breath in their separate rooms, the father stands quietly in the dark kitchen enjoying a glass of water, completely unaware that his household was just moments away from a spectacular and scandalous explosion. Jin Young walks through the streets with a heavy heart, feeling the weight of his choices catching up to him. He reflects on how his relationship with his sister felt wrong from the very beginning and concludes that no matter how much they might care for each other, they simply cannot continue this way. He decides it is finally time to end their secret cardio arrangement and return to their peaceful lives, assuming that she is likely waiting for him to make that very decision. He arrives at the convenience store expecting a normal shift, but is surprised to find his manager waiting for him instead of his usual coworker. She explains that a last-minute schedule change brought her in early, and she immediately notices Jin Young's defeated expression. She begins to tease him about being heartbroken, laughing off his concerns about unfixable love by pointing out that the modern world is full of unconventional couples. She eventually suggests that his lack of energy is a problem for the business and decides that as his boss, she needs to take personal responsibility for his well-being. The manager provides a very hands-on distraction right there behind the counter, arguing that a stressed employee cannot perform his duties effectively.